I've been thinking about this talk and topic for quite some time, the nexus of Father's Day and Juneteenth, and what they might have to do with each other besides a coincidence on the calendar. They come next to each other. Father's Day is always this, the third Sunday in June? It's always the third Sunday in June, and Juneteenth on June 19th. It is a portmanteau, the word. And so they come right together, and I'm always interested in what two disparate ideas can have to do with each other. And I think what they have to do is in the nature of authority. Who says what is and what will be so? And how do we make decisions in our own lives that will reflect the values we ascribe to the authorities that we recognize? As we think about the nature of authority, today viewed through the lens of fathers and governments, I hope we'll keep in mind the shifting nature of authority. When I began thinking about this sermon this idea years ago, my idea of it has shifted since then as the nature of authority has shifted. But always the question, who says how we shall be able to live our lives? Part of what we say as humanists is that we say how we shall be able to live our lives, and yet we live in nested reality. There are, by necessity, by living as citizens in this city and state and nation and world, laws that govern us. So this notion of who says is important. First, to Father's Day. Many of us in this room may have complicated relationships with our fathers, whether they are alive or deceased. And some of us may come from a line of men who did not even speak in terms of complicated relationships. Whether they are living or dead, our relationships with our fathers may continue to shift and change as we ourselves grow into maturity and come to see our fathers' actions through the eyes of an adult. That our dads were often doing the best they could, just as we are doing the best we can. Some of us can say our fathers were honorable men, and some are not able to hold that. Some of us did not even grow up with fathers in our families. Maybe you were raised by two moms, or your two moms raising children, or raised by a single parent, or a sibling, or an auntie, or grandparents, or foster care. The notion of fathering, as with mothering, is so much more expansive than it was as I was growing up, when it was one dad and one mom, two kids, two cars, a couple of cats, a dog. That's the way a family looked. I'm so glad that families look so much more multiplicity today. Poet Sharon Olds, who wrote extensively about the dysfunction in her family, the alcoholism and abuse, has an achingly tender poem about getting through an airport and to her father's bedside as he lay dying. Even in the face of difficult memory, such is the power of the relationship, primal, authoritative, powerful, that this day may bring a strange brew of emotions as we contemplate our connection to our dads. You may be a dad, you may want to be a dad, you may be estranged from your own children, or feel that you are not enough as a dad. And don't we, every human being, feel sometimes that we are not enough? As many of us as are in this room there are that many mixed emotions about Father's Day. So, as much as it is possible to say so, love to the fathers in the room. Many of us, but not all of us, come to humanism and Unitarian Universalism from religious traditions that proclaim God as the Father. Once I became a Unitarian Universalist, and before I navigated to humanism as we practice it here at First Unitarian Society, much of my theological study was in the service of the divine feminine. I worked really hard to excise that idea of the Father God in the sky, you know, the Zeus-like character. When I was growing up, in the church I was growing up, I just thought Jesus was like this really cool guy with a very mad dad. That was kind of the idea of Jesus I had, and that was a childish understanding, but I needed to understand more and learn that there are people who still have a belief in a parent God that don't believe in Zeus, right? Of the notion of a parent God, Dr. Michael Potegal, retired pediatric neuropsychologist at the University of Minnesota, says this: belief in supernatural beings of great size and strength is ancient, widespread, and probably universal in the past. Such beliefs could be rooted in the obligatory experience of every human that survived childhood and adolescence, that as infants we were cared for creatures of great size and strength and full authority. Why? As let me get to the end of that quote. They were cared for by creatures larger and stronger than themselves who ruled their world. Disclaimer, Mike is also my husband. The suggestion that human development from protected infancy through childhood predisposes us to see the ultimate authority as a parent, right? And so when the ancient people were figuring out what was a greater ultimate authority than mere small human me, it was logical that we would see that as a parent God. It would be surprising if they told their stories of ultimacy about something besides a parent God, right? Human development also teaches us that in the natural order of things, we grow to maturity and often become parents ourselves, and we grieve our parents' death. So what happens in a relationship with the holy, with the ultimate, when human beings are never given the opportunity to mature, to go beyond being the child of the Father? We're necessarily infantilized. I know that's not the theology of most of us here, but I think it's useful to understand it as, even as we've left, many of us, as the pervasive reason for the fathering authority figure. Without the protection of God the parent, many of us walk around in the world every day without the protection of God the parent. I am hopeful that we grow into a kind of spiritual maturity that invites us to practice humility and flexibility and curiosity and courage and grace, to count our blessings, even if we don't rely on a sky parent to bestow them. I want to be very careful here not to denigrate people who are theists, who do understand and have a deep and loving relationship with a God that they name or understand as a parent. I don't want to denigrate that relationship. That's up to them. What I want to say is, for me, how do I continue to explore the nature of being a human being without what the ancients understood as a sky father, a sky parent. I've asked FUS member Perry Nixon, father of the two beautiful young children you saw up here today, along with his wife, Rebecca, how his authority in parenting is different than how he was parented. Perry, will you share with us?
Good morning, brothers and sisters. How are we doing today? We're doing well? Good, excellent. Thank you, Rev Kelly. I appreciate that. It's interesting when Rev Kelly asked me to give a talk about fatherhood and how it pertains to authority, I was a little stumped because it's just something that I had never thought about before. Obviously, I'm a father, and obviously I'm an authority figure. But what does that really mean, right? And so I did the typical thing. I went to Google University and found a definition, and I started writing kind of based on that definition. And about halfway through it, I had to start over because I found that it was too cerebral, too academic, too sterile. And so I tossed it and started over and was thinking about the question, who says? And that it occurred to me that I say what an authority figure looks like as a father and how that presents itself in my family. And so I came up with kind of my own definition for what authority is as it pertains to fatherhood. And what I came up with is to effectively be in any position of authority is a huge responsibility and requires great skill and humility to be done well. I'm going to read that one more time. To effectively be in any position of authority is a huge responsibility and requires great skill and humility to be done well. Now, as far as pertaining to fatherhood specifically, now my stepfather growing up ruled with an iron fist. Okay, he was your classic violent, abusive, alcoholic father, right? And so you can imagine what authority looked like for him. Now, my mother, on the other hand, she was no authority figure at all. She was the classic insecure, codependent, battered wife. So you can imagine what authority looked like for her. Excuse me. And I mean, I'll spare you all the gory details, but suffice it to say, by the time I was 10 years old, I had decided that I did not want to have a family. I did not want to be a father because I did not want to do to my family what my stepfather did to his family. And the only way that I knew at that time in my little 10-year-old brain to prevent that was to just avoid the whole thing altogether. And looking back on it, I think that's a really sad conclusion for a 10-year-old boy to come to about family and about fatherhood. But not surprising given my experience and circumstances at the time. But you know, in the back of my head, I'd always told myself that if, on the slight chance or possibility that I would become a father, that I promised that I would not be like him. Right? I would not be like him. But the problem is that leaves a void then, right? It's like, okay, so I know what I do not want. I know what I do not want it to look like. But that doesn't answer the question, then what do I want it to look like? And that's a really, really difficult question to answer when it has not been role modeled. And I'm actually going to digress a second if I can. I feel it's necessary to say that, just kind of as a side note, that the influence of historical and cultural trauma that comes from being a descendant of slaves and an oppressed people is very real and very present in my life's story. But that's gristles for another meal. Maybe we could talk about that at another time. But I do want to acknowledge the effects of slavery and oppression, and that they are generational, and they are deeply psychological. But that's all I'll say about that, unless somebody accuse me of talking about critical race theory and we get this place shut down or something like that. So.
No, baby. Come on.
Excuse me. So fast forward 40 years. I am 50 now. Yes, I got a late start, but I am much more wise, and I have much more bandwidth, and I am able to be present for my children in a way that I would not have been able to do before. And so I make no apologies about fatherhood at a late start. It actually worked out much better for me. But it has been, it's been a difficult journey, you know. I have a very clear idea, yet evolving idea of what father as an authority figure looks like. But it has not been easy coming to that, right? Lots of introspection and therapy and trial and error, and I got a lot wrong. I got a lot wrong. But I'm here now, and I have a wonderful, beautiful family, and they think I'm awesome. My son thinks I'm extremely funny, and I know that's not going to last long. So I'm definitely enjoying it while I can, and I feel so grateful and honored that I get to parent these two beautiful children who I think they're down at the little boat outside now. Oh, good. So anyway, so I was thinking about you know, what it means, what authority as a father means to me specifically. And so I just kind of wrote down a few adjectives that really resonated with me, and I'd like to share those with you now, if I may. Father as an authority figure is empathic. He is humble. He is benevolent. He respects his children's autonomy. He sets clear and fair boundaries, and then enforces clear and fair consequences when those boundaries are crossed. He has high expectations. He has high expectations for his children. He has unconditional and unshakable love for his children. And he is consistent in his role as an authority figure and as their father. So basically, in a nutshell, I feel like my role as a father lands somewhere in between a democracy and a dictatorship, right? It's kind of how that goes, just kind of the nature of the power dynamic and my desire to do everything in my power to make sure that they are okay, even if they don't like the decisions that I'm making for them. Obviously, if you've seen, my children are quite young, and kind of what Kelli alluded to, I'm basically kind of their God, right? And that's a huge responsibility. And I know that also will not last long. Eventually, sooner or later, hopefully, they will see me for who I really truly am, as a loving but fallible human being. Hopefully they come to that later than sooner, because I like being their God, but they'll get to that. My role as father and authority figure is evolving, and it is changing, and will continue to do so as my children grow, and it is my responsibility as their parent to be flexible and to evolve and grow as they do. And so my hope and my goal is to model authority in such a way that my children respect authority and question authority, right? Don't believe everything that you're told because someone is in a position of authority, okay? And so, so my hope is that they will practice authority in their own lives with the skill and humility that it deserves. Because one day they will likely find themselves in a position of authority, either professionally or personally. Maybe they will become parents. And so with that in mind, I feel like to be able to positively, effectively role model authority as a father for my children is a beautiful, beautiful gift that I give them. It's a wonderful skill. It's a wonderful gift that I can pass on to them and that they can keep with them for the rest of their lives. And hopefully they will pass that on to the people who they come in contact with. So, with that being said, happy Father's Day, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Perry, I know you share that authority with your amazing partner, your life partner, Rebecca, and I'm so glad that you are part of you and your family are part of our community here. So I want to just shift a little bit, and I won't spend a long time on this, but I want to say how I tie Juneteenth into this, and I appreciate you're talking about the generational impact and trauma of enslavement in this country. So you know this story, but I'm going to give you the bones of it. In the midst of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln signed the executive order, the Emancipation Proclamation, on January 1st, 1863. The war raged on for another 2 years, and on April 1865, General Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox. Lincoln was shot just 5 days later on April 14th. Reconstruction in the federal states began during the war and continued in earnest after it, carried out largely by the Union military in the former Confederate states to ensure emancipation and to prevent violence against the enslaved people who had now been free, as well as to shift the economies from labor from enslavement to paid labor. Okay, April gave way to May, and May gave way to June, and my home state of Texas had not yet recognized the end of the war. Chaos and mayhem were reigning in Texas, the order of the day. Troops had fallen into thievery and looting. These are Confederate troops. Soldiers and civilians plundered the garrison and storehouses. They plundered a train. There were gunpowder explosions. The treasury in Austin was raided. This is not last week. This is 1863. By the end of May, half of the Confederate forces had deserted or been disbanded, and order disappeared into lawlessness in many areas of the state. Into this mayhem, Union General Gordon Granger sailed into Galveston on a steamy Monday, June 19th, to issue this proclamation. The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with the proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves shall be free. It goes on. What he says goes on. but it took the authority of the government that won the war, that kept the Union together, to come in and say, the slaves, the people who are enslaved, are free. Until someone with the authority to say so and to back it up, he came with troops. The people, descended into lawlessness, could just do whatever the heck they wanted to do. And that's why Juneteenth is a day. When I was growing up in Texas, I thought it was just our holiday, because I'd learned that piece of Texas history. I didn't learn very much about, I'm not even sure I learned that in school, but I learned it because Juneteenth was a big celebration in Texas and Louisiana and Arkansas. This is only the second year that it is a federal holiday. It's been celebrated in Minnesota for quite some time, but only the second year that it's a federal holiday. That takes a lot of work to get it to be a federal holiday. Who says? Enough people say, this is important, we must recognize this. This is part of our history that we must uphold. What is important is that no one is free until all are free. That's who says. That's why Juneteenth is so important. And so, I love the combination of Juneteenth and Father's Day. I hope that in coming years, when it comes up and you'll think, what do those have to do with each other? And you'll think, oh, I know. It's about authority and who says. We have to be careful about what the government tells us we can do and cannot do. As we well know, that the government is not the great parent, and we are a part of it. That's what our UU the Vote work is about. That's what our advocacy work is about. That's what being a resistance is about. As we see things we disagree with, and the stakes are very high, there has always been a resistance, and we are part of that resistance.